No ordinary jukebox. It's a beautiful day in Ponyville, and the train station clock is about to strike in 15 seconds. When it did, the train comes in and stops at the designated checkpoint. A door opens and a stallion steps out, looking extremely nervous. He puts on his hood with a cape covering his cutie mark so nobody would question it. He starts to walk down Ponyville with his head down low, glancing the town with a nervous look. The pony folk starts to become a little bit suspicious, even the main six, Starlight and Spike. In the middle of the walk, Twilight teleports herself beside him and plans to give him a wonderful welcome. But when Jukebox looks at Twilight after her sentence, he zips off fast as lightning, finding a good spot to hide for him to live till he can come across Twilight's castle and decides to hide behind there. With Twilight confused on why he just ran off like that, he calls Starlight to help her out. Starlight accepts the task and runs down to Jukebox's trail. Starlight finds James's hood in front of the castle, making her assume that he would be inside. After Starlight looked everywhere for him, she rethinks of what Twilight and the others said, and her eyes cut open a window in her sight. She then smirks as she thought of an idea to jump out of it, assuming that James would save her. She started to act of giving up hope, and then she jumps out of the window to cause Jukebox's senses to save her. Starlight's plan succeeded, and then notices JJ has his eyes closed, still waiting for the save. He opened his eyes, turned to Starlight, and runs off again, but Starlight teleports herself in front of JJ, making him stop right in his tracks. She kindly tells him to not be afraid and introduces herself. He sighs and introduces himself as well when Twilight and Fluttershy heard the voices. Starlight asks him why he ran off in a flash. Then James answers, and he was highly nervous about meeting new folk and thought he would be teased just because he's different. Starlight notices Twilight and Fluttershy in the back and invites them into the conversation. She introduces them to James and begins to feel comfortable. Starlight asks why he's worried that he might get teased from his difference, then he tells the girls about his past. The others are at the Hayburger with Spike, wondering how long Twilight, Starlight, and Fluttershy are taking. Spike unexpectedly coughs off a special scroll that shows a hologram of Twilight when he opened it. Every pony was amazed, and Twilight told Spike to come to the castle to meet the new stallion on the block. She said that he wants to learn a new ability. The fact of the matter, he likes to learn and practice new powers all the time. Spike and the others were surprised at what Twilight was saying, but the others became a little bit skeptical when she said powers. Applejack questions Twilight's words and reminds everyone that ponies who have a lot of power are usually evil. Rainbow Dash catches that every pony becomes suspicious. Spike, on the other hand, also became a little suspicious, and then he decided to go to the castle and figure out his plan. At the castle, Twilight and Starlight helps James learn his new ability, magic. And with a determined look, he's ready to go. Spike approaches the castle before the practicing even started, and Twilight stopped James for a second and tells him not to strain himself too much. All it took was a few deep breaths and relax. JJ released his body, closed his eyes, and instantly he disappears and reappears again. Watching from behind a tree, Spike was in shock because no Earth pony would ever learn magic like that. Twilight congratulates him on learning and tells him to keep practicing until he masters it. And he kindly responds to her instructions and would be honored to do so. Suddenly, James begins to tingle. A big branch from a tree falls off, about to hit Fluttershy in the head, and he throws a web line from his wrists and pulls Fluttershy out of the branch's way. Fluttershy was surprised that James saved her life and thanks him. James was feeling a little proud of himself for a second, but when he saw that Twilight and Starlight, with their jaws dropped, he felt ashamed. Twilight and Starlight run up to him in amazement, complimenting him, and Spike came out of hiding to compliment James too. Twilight notices and introduces James to him, and James gives a hello to Spike, and he gives one back saying that his rope ability was impressive. James tells him that it's not a rope, but some sort of webbing. He retracts the web line from Fluttershy and shows him his web shooters. James told the four that someone back in his homeworld gave them to these as he was a little boy. Twilight was surprised yet again knowing that he's from another world, and James started to blush a little bit. Rainbow Dash and the others began to spy on James to see what evil plans he had. Twilight teleports herself, Starlight, Spike, and Fluttershy to Canterlot to speak to Princess Celestia and Luna about James. James is alone in the back of the castle practicing his powers on an obstacle course he made himself, not noticing that others were watching him every single step of the way. And he was now practicing his favorite ability, telekinetic ice control. Rainbow Dash watches very, very closely to see what he's going to do. and James targets a tree branch and throws a bunch of icicles at it, lining up perfectly vertical. Pinkie just looks surprised and planned to say something, but Rainbow shushed her in the nick of time. And James was finished with his session and thought that Twilight is a really good coach at magic and says that he can return the favor by taking her out. The girls gasp and frighten, run off hiding behind a huge rock, not realizing that he's taking her out to lunch as a big thanks for making him welcome. Rainbow Dash thought that she knew that James was evil and plans to take out Twilight and then take over Equestria forever. And Rarity wonders what they should do to get rid of him. Before it begins, and Rainbow answered, they gather up every pony in Ponyville and run him out of town. Every pony is gathered around Ponyville Town Hall for a town meeting to get rid of James for good. Mayor Mare begins the meeting by talking about how James is a natural disaster waiting to happen. Rainbow also flies up to the podium and begins her speech. James hears a lot of cheering from the town and begins to investigate, and he made it to the town hall and he sees a Rainbow Dash, thinking that he's really evil, and when he's actually not. He smiles and shakes his head, thinking to himself that what Rainbow Dash is saying, it's ridiculous. Pinkie spots James and points at him to get every pony's attention. James smiles and waves at the crowd, but every pony is just glaring at him, especially the girls on the stage. He looks confused on how the crowd is just looking at him and questions about it. Rainbow Dash flies up in James's face and asks him why he has so many abilities and his evil plan to take over Equestria. James is just surprised to hear that ridiculous statement, so the elements of harmony come up to him and start scolding. James backs away from them, and slowly doing so, every pony walks up to James, continuously glaring at him. Feeling afraid, James runs away from the crowd, but Rainbow Dash shouts at every pony to chase him out. And he's still running, but every pony else is still on his tail, and James trips and falls, having every pony catch up to him. James questions what all of this is about, and Applejack just tells him not to ask again and just leave. James refuses to do so, making Rainbow Dash even more upset, scaring James into tearing up. A teary James says his final words and runs out of town crying. Rainbow Dash shouts to James to never come back, and James just continues on running. Starlight, Twilight, Fluttershy, and Spike are back from Cancel Out with the two princesses, but every pony is not in town. Until they hear music from Sugar Cube Corner. They ran to investigate, and at once they got there, they see a big sign saying, "No more evil outsiders." It was just a big party celebrating the elimination of James from the town. Twilight became curious about where James is, but Rainbow told her not to even think about Jukebox, which is what Dash called him at the time, and just be glad that he's no longer a threat to them. Fluttershy disagrees with Rainbow just what she said and asked where he is. And Applejack answered that all of them chased him out of town, and told him to never ever come back, with Pinkie adding a forever dramatic effect. Princess Celestia asked if they got a chance to talk to him, and suddenly the music stops, and every pony gathers around the girls who started the meeting. As the element of honesty, Applejack wants to tell every pony the truth, but Rainbow flies in and covers her mouth by saying that they did, and every pony is relieved. Applejack gives Rainbow the stink eye for just a few seconds, and Starlight tells him that he's not really evil. But Rainbow Dash disagrees and says to keep things the way they are. Alicorns and unicorns with magic, Earth ponies just have a green thumb, and Pegasuses just fly. Twilight tells Rainbow that every pony is special just the way they are, even if they have more abilities than one. And Rainbow Dash scoffs, and just asks how one pony with different abilities can possibly save Equestria from being destroyed. Which cuts to Trixie practicing a new spell, but somehow it just backfires and creates a giant wormhole sucking everything in sight. Twilight points to the wormhole to answer her question, but Rainbow scoffs and tell her that they can handle it. Rainbow heroically flies in to stop and put it at an end with its destruction as well as the others. Sadly, none of their attacks prevailed. With the elements and the princesses battling the wormhole as best they can, Twilight, Starlight, and Spike run off to find James, and their first assumption was behind the castle, and they most certainly were right. James was behind the castle again, only this time doing nothing, with tears streaming down his face. Twilight tells him that every pony's in danger because a giant wormhole was appearing, and they might need an extra hoof. JJ denies the request because of what Rainbow Dash and the others did to him, and Spike disagrees and tells him that he can prove them wrong. She'll change her mind, and Twilight will tell them it was actually a lie. JJ says to forget the whole thing, and then thought if he wouldn't have come to Ponyville, the whole situation wouldn't have ever happened. Then he asks how can any pony be friends with a freak like him. They just judge him before they even knew him, and Twilight has heard of the story a few hours again, and James apologizes for repeating himself. Starlight walks up to him saying that he has 4 new friends already referring to her. Twilight, Spike, and Fluttershy. And she's certain that they'll be his friends as well if he just gives them a chance. So he looks over to a smiling Starlight for a second, then turns to Twilight, asking if he thinks he can do this. Twilight nodded, and then the 5 began to head back to Ponyville to save the day. The wormhole is still on a rampage. Applejack, Rarity, Pinky, Rainbow, Celestia, and Luna are still doing their best to keep out of harm's way until one mare trips on Rarity, making them lose balance and getting sucked into the wormhole. Twilight and the other 3 made it just in the nick of time, and James runs up to the wormhole, jumping in, grabbing the 2 mares, and uses a web line to pull themselves out. James fought the beast, but he was strong enough to get out. Rainbow Dash was in shock while every pony else cheered, and with the help of Twilight's magical teachings, he made the wormhole disappear in just a split second. The cheering was still going on, but James stopped it and tells every pony that just because he stopped a wormhole doesn't mean that they can trust him of not being evil. James turns around and walks away back to the train station, and Twilight tried to stop him, but she just couldn't, and the guilt just began to eat at Rainbow Dash. So, feeling sorry for herself, she flies up to James and tells her the truth. The absolute, real truth. Every pony gathers around James, and Rainbow Dash feels the same way. Princess Celestia and Luna compliment on Rainbow Dash's confessions, and tells her that not every pony has to be in the order of nature. With 1 or more abilities one pony has, he or she can help in any way, because every pony is unique and individual. Rainbow Dash apologizes to James for misjudging him as a bad guy. And she just wasn't used to other ponies with so many powers like that, especially spider and telekinetic ice powers. James accepts her apology, and with a smiling Applejack and Pinky, they pull out a party cannon for a Welcome to Ponyville party. James pulls out his customized party cannon and moves it next to Pinky's, and Pinky notices that, and she just smiles very, very big. The party is still going on strong, and the rest of the elements of harmony introduce themselves to James, and he introduced himself to them. The only surprise is that he knows both Celestia and Princess Luna. Much to Twilight's surprise, she asked how they knew him, and he answered that Sunset Shimmer had told him all about the 2. Changing the subject, Applejack, Rarity, and Pinky apologized for their first approach as well. James accepts their apologies as well, and Princess Celestia walks up to him, saying that he's glad to come and visit, and wishes to stay and live in Ponyville with their new friends he'd made. James looks to the princesses and turns to the main 6, and finally turns to Spike and Starlight. JJ said that Ponyville's got a new stallion on the block, which means that he's gonna stay. Every pony cheered, and Princess Celestia was thrilled that he's staying, and plans to have him visit her castle in Canterlot. Luna agrees with that offer as well. James smiles with the elements, Spike, and Starlight just all hugging each other.